Welcome to Sorry I'm a Bitch, the podcast for anyone who's ever been called a bitch. Hosted by Kaylee Ellis and produced by me, Hannah Laree.
Welcome to Sorry I'm a Bitch. I'm your host, Kaylee. And today we are talking about co-parenting. We interviewed, should I say I? This is weird. It's weird being one person. It's weird. I mean, Hannah's still here, but I feel like she's steering the boat, but I am out on the boat. I feel like I'm alone. I'm just looking out. I see ocean. She's down there. I know she's steering it, but I feel alone. Okay, so I interviewed a dear friend of mine, Caity. We are childhood friends. We grew up together. So when Caity, when we were about 19 years old, told me, hey, I'm pregnant, whoa, blew up my world. We talk about it in the interview about how I reacted to that news. But I do remember at the time thinking, oh my God, if I got pregnant by my boyfriend now, I would have to deal with him for the rest of my life? Hell no. Broke up with my boyfriend at the time because I was like, no way. But Caity and her high school boyfriend at the time co-parent now, and they co-parent beautifully. Caity has a really cool co-parenting relationship with her baby daddy.
That's what I call him too. Yeah. He doesn't care.
How old was your son when you guys split?
He was about 1.5 years. He was little. He doesn't remember.
No. And how old is he now?
He is going to be 15.
Which is interesting because I was also 1.5 when my parents split up. So I was young. I don't remember my parents being married, being together. Neither does her son. And she says that. She's very young and we've had a lot of time to perfect this, and they have perfected it. That is something my parents did not do. My parents never perfected the co-parent lifestyle. How do you handle differences in parenting styles?
Honestly, the guys just let me mom. I mean, like, out of the three of us, I'm the one that calls the shots, and they just go with it. Like, they trust everything that I do. And I don't think it's phenomenal men that makes this easy.
She also mentions that even Alex, which is her baby daddy, has another daughter with someone else, and he will call Caity and ask for advice because he's like, hey, I've got a daughter. What do I do? He even trusts her with a child that's not even hers, which is awesome. In this answer, she says that phenomenal men make it work. And if you're with a shit guy, it's never going to work. And this kind of triggered a little, childhood trauma for me in a sense, where my mom did not co-parent with a phenomenal guy. My mom co-parented with a shit guy, but more so, my mom co-parented with a narcissist. My dad could only control the situation. He needed admiration. He needed validation, whether that was from his ex-wife or his children. And he was not happy unless he had those three things: control, admiration, and validation at all times. And my mom was just not willing to give him any of those. So he had to make our lives very hard. I want to make it very clear, though. If you give a narcissist all three of these things, they will still make your life hard. There is no easy way to co-parent with a narcissist. There is only cutting off contact. We will only talk unless it deals with the kids. Even when you do this with a narcissist, that narcissist is going to only talk to you when it comes to the kids, but he's going to make shit up all the time that comes with the kids. There's just really no easy way to do it. So if you have a shit guy, there's no hope.
No, absolutely not. And if you have stuff that you didn't resolve, it's never going to work. I mean, that's where it is.
Caity says that the hardest part is when there's other women that come into the situation.
They have to be real cool with a lot of things really quickly. Mm-hmm. And that just doesn't always work out. And it's just hard.
And I mention, I'm sure this is kind of a weird thing to come into. I think most people are used to coming into a co-parent thing where everyone just kind of hates each other. They kind of sit across from the gymnasium and watch their kids play basketball or whatever, and they don't really interact. There's drop off, the kids jump out of the car, go into the house. There's no really talking. People hate each other. And I said, so I'd imagine it's a little weird, for someone to come in and your husband's like, hey, let's go have, or their husband is like, hey, let's go have dinner at my ex's house, or let's have Christmas at my ex's house. And they're like, what do you mean? So I'm sure it's weird for on that side of it. But she does say, like, this is how we do it. Either get on board or get out. My kids deserve to have a really healthy environment in both homes. And I love that. I mean, they definitely put their children first. I do think too, when we ended the interview and we started talking, she said, I still have love for Alex. And even her husband has said, like, this is your first love. Like, they don't discredit that at all. And I said, well, I think that you guys have figured it out. Love doesn't have to be romantic. You can love somebody and it not be a romantic love. She's like, right. I romantically love my husband and I love and respect my ex as my child's other parent. Beautiful. But my dad would have other women. He'd have girlfriends. He had a lot of girlfriends. And I always knew he had a new girlfriend because all of a sudden he'd want me in his life. He'd come pick me up. He'd play the part. We'd go on vacation or whatever. And he'd play the part of dad during that time. But that only lasts so long. And not even the end of the relationship. At some point, a narcissist, they show their true colors. They can't hide it for very long. So then at some point in the relationship, he didn't want to be dad anymore. So we didn't see him. And girlfriend would go, where are your kids? And he'd go, my ex is keeping them from me. She won't let me see them. And so girlfriend would hate my mom and it'd be like this whole deal. And the cycle would just kind of rinse and repeat after that. She'd leave because she'd go, no, I think your kids are calling and you're not answering. And then she'd leave. What is the best part of co-parenting?
Oh, I asked Alex this yesterday, and I asked Jackson, and they said just that all of us get along. And then Jackson said, I think my dads are a little gay. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, they bro out more than you guys. It's true. I'll come home from work and they'll just be hanging out. I'm like, what are you doing? Why are you in my house? And they're just hanging out playing games.
My dad's just bro out. And I thought, man, my dad and stepdad would bro out if you consider fist fighting in front of me on the lawn, broing out. I remember sitting there and being like, these are adults. I don't think I want to be an adult. That sucks. My mom knew how to pick them. I can tell you, they all had rage. She was just like, that was like her one check mark. She was like, do you have rage issues? Let's get married. I love the lighthearted story that Caity tells.
One year we got a wild hair and we said, let's do co-parenting Thanksgiving. And so Ree came, Alex's ex, and we had all the kids there, and Alex kept handing Jarrett shots. I mean, shot after shot. And Jarrett's not a drinker. And he just kept taking them. It was bonding. And eventually he couldn't stand, and Alex had to take him to bed and undress him. And I just remember them, they were both pretty drunk. And I just remember him saying, I am so glad you can give her everything I couldn't.
I was trying to think of what's a funny, lighthearted story that I have when it comes to co-parenting or my dad. The story that I thought of was my dad was an alcoholic. The only Christmas I ever spent with him, we went on a Christmas cruise, and he took me down to the bar. I was 16. He asked the bartender to make 2 dirty gin martinis with extra olives. And he said, have you ever had a drink? And I said, no. And he said, well, you're going to have one now. So you need to know what it tastes like. I was like, okay. Bartender was like, I'm not making a dirty martini for her. Obviously, she's too young. And my dad gave him $100 bill and he said, "How old is she now?" And the bartender goes, "She's 21. I took one sip of it. I thought it tasted like dirty socks. And I was like, gross. I will never touch alcohol. I did not mess with alcohol for a long time. So it did work. But now my favorite drink is a dirty gin martini with extra olive. So I don't know if your cocktail choice is inherited. If you could go back and give yourself any advice, what would it be?
I wouldn't change a thing, because if I would tell myself something, I would defer, and I wouldn't have Jack. I would not have the girls. There wouldn't be a thing I would change.
I started thinking about what advice I would give myself as a child of divorce. If I could go back and just kind of talk to my younger self, like, hey, just give some advice when it comes to how to handle having co-parents. And my advice to myself was, one day you're going to channel your trauma and you're going to turn that into creativity. You're going to find an outlet for that. When I was 8 years old, I wrote my first book. And I wrote basically an evidence book for the judge as evidence of the abuse that was going on when I would go to my dad's for his weekend. And in the book, I had photocopied all of the objects that he had hit us with, including a cowboy boot that had a spur on the back. I put it in the photocopier and I photocopied it and just kind of made this book and then stapled it and gave my mom that and said, "Here, use this as evidence that, he's abusing us. And then maybe the judge won't make us go over there anymore." There was one weekend that we stayed there and he just didn't come home. So we lived off of Klondike bars. That's the only thing he had. So I moved the chair over to the freezer, opened the freezer, and my sister and I just ate Klondike bars the entire weekend. And it's ironic because the second book that I started writing after my dad died. And it was a way to channel my trauma from how to experience grief when it's a parent that abandoned you. How do you do that? How do you grieve someone you've already grieved? In a sense, you're not really grieving that person. You're kind of grieving what you never had and what you will never have because they're gone. So the first book I ever wrote was just kind of channeling my trauma of the abuse that was going on when he would have his weekends. And the third book that I ever wrote was channeling the trauma of his death. So I guess if I would go back in time and give advice to myself as a child of co-parenting, I would say, keep doing that. Keep channeling that trauma and turning that into a creative flow, find creativity in it, find a passion project. And I think this goes for anyone. You see a lot of times children who have dealt with trauma or abuse growing up, they become social workers or something where they want to protect kids from going through what they went through. I loved when Caity said, we decided that we could co-parent better than we were a couple.
My parents were together way longer than they should have been. And I remember when I was a teenager and when I turned 18, I said, I wish you would have divorced a long time ago because they could not stand each other. And to the point where we realized we would hate each other if we stayed together. And it just wasn't working. We wanted different things. He never wanted to get married. I did. And we realized really early that we could co-parent better than we could be a couple. And it's just easier. When you get to that point together, it's just easier.
By the way, these are 19-year-olds. These are young people that are just like, no, we need to put our child first, or we're not a couple. The self-awareness that young and going through postpartum, which is hard for both parents, like having a child that's 1.5, and then being able to have that self-awareness, impeccable. In the question, I also say, what do you say to moms, especially that are scared to leave somebody and then they have to split time with their kids with that person? And I kind of thought back to my mom about how scared she had to have been because she had to split time with her children, but she had to do that with her abuser, who then turned into our abuser. And she could kind of soften the hits when we were all under the same roof, but she couldn't do that when we weren't. I think she thought that they would go to divorce court and he would just relinquish his rights and she wouldn't have to. But that's not what happened. The judge bashed her for having children with him. He said, "This is who you decided to have children with. So this is who you are going to have to co parent with." It didn't matter that my first memory is him whooping her ass in the kitchen. And, like it didn't matter what he did to her. That none of that mattered. It didn't matter that he was an alcoholic and he would drive drunk with us in the car. Like none of this mattered to the judge because he was more concerned with just sticking it to my mom, because moms always get the blame. And we saw this in our Instagram comments. We interviewed Chandra, who's also a dear friend of mine, about her divorce. Well, it was really about her just being a mom. And then she brought up her divorce as the most traumatizing part of motherhood to her, not just to her, but to her kids. And what she said was so beautiful. Like it was just always put her kids first. But it was the hardest day of her life. She was very raw, very real, very honest. And of course, we had a man get in. He said, statistically, parents that argue but stay together do less societal damage than divorced parents, especially when it's a single mom. So my producer, Hannah, screenshots it. She sends it to me because anytime someone says like a shitty thing, she's normally like, get him, girl. I don't care what I am doing. I will. She's like, sick 'em. And I'm like, let's do it. I was on my porch. I was having a beautiful time. It was 70 degrees. I had a margarita. I was yelling at all the neighbors who walked by, like, can you believe this weather? I was having a great time. Hannah sends it to me and she's like, get him. And I was like, bet. So I said to him, show me the statistic, Matt. Are you basing this off of experience? Did your parents divorce and now you're a piece of shit? And of course, Matt was like, don't you dare talk about my mama and my papa. They stayed together for me. And I said, well, maybe your parents should have divorced. I bet they fought a lot. You seem very hard to live with. And he said, no wonder your husband left you. I'm looking around. My husband left me? Who's gonna pay my bills? Did he take the kid? News to me. I didn't know my husband left me. I do know you're a piece of shit. He said, you are unkind. And I said, honey, the podcast is called Sorry, I'm a Bitch. You commented on a podcast called Sorry, I'm a Bitch, which, by the way, I apologized ahead of time, which is very courteous of me. I didn't have to. And he said, I cannot believe you act like this. And I said, you can't? I told you from my name how I was going to act. I'm very self-aware. And by the way, Chandra started to cry in this. Actually, we all cried in this clip. So he saw a woman hurting and he said, fuck this bitch. What? Which is just so fitting that this is my experience where the judge is bashing my mom, for being a single mother. Chandra is on here. She's talking about being a single mother. And he goes, yeah, single mothers are the worst. They cause the most damage, but never the fact. Why is she a single mom? Where's dad? Does abandonment cause societal damage? Is it actually because kids need two parents for the most part? And now you've got a dad who is left and you've got a mom picking up the pieces. and cleaning up a mess that a shitty dude left behind, and you blame the woman who's standing there with a fucking broom and not the guy who hit the fucking road? I mean, seriously, if we start making men accountable and holding them accountable, I think that would actually cause the most societal change instead of blaming the mother and saying, well, that's his right to leave. That causes societal damage. Divorce does not cause damaged kids. That's not the cause of damaged children. The trauma of being placed between two people who are supposed to love you the most and they just can't get along, that causes trauma. Abandonment causes trauma. I don't have trauma because my mom raised children on her own. I have trauma because my dad left. And when he came around, he was a shitty fucking person. But my mom didn't cause that damage. That was him. The constant conflict between two people, the pressure to pick sides, that's what causes trauma. Witnessing my stepdad and my dad fighting on the lawn in front of me, that caused trauma. My poor mom, she had to deal with being bashed by the judge, having to hand over her children to her abuser. There was one time we just didn't come home. Mom goes to pick us up. We're not at dad's house. Mom is with my grandma. He's not answering the phone. They break a window out of his house. They go inside. There's not a soul inside the house. They don't know where we are. His car's gone. They can't find us. This is before the times of tracking your kids on their phones or any of this. I think I think my sister was probably 4 or 5, and maybe I was 6 or 7 or something like that. We were very young. And I remember my dad, he dropped us off at a woman's house and he left. And we'd never met this woman before in our lives. I couldn't even tell you her name, but we were there and she's like, do you guys know your mom's number? And we're like, no, we're 6. This is also why we have taught my daughter, starting at 3 years old, our address and our phone numbers and our full names. So, that's why sometimes she'll call us Kaylee and Zach, and I'm okay with that. And this is why, because I was probably 6 or 7 years old and she's going, what's your mom's phone number? What's your address? And I'm going, I don't know. My mom and I were talking and I said, she got us gifts. And mom goes, well, it wasn't Christmas because you never spent a Christmas with him. And I said, it must have been my birthday because she gave me gifts to open. So I must have been there for my birthday. And I just remember being like, this is great, but I want my mom. This poor woman, she was so out of her wheelhouse. She had no idea what to do. And so finally, somehow she gets my dad back. He must have gone on a bender. Gets my dad back to her house. We go out to eat. And she's like, they're going back home. They're going back to their mom. She left the restaurant. She just left the restaurant. She was like, you're not coming back to my house. He puts us in the car. We go stay at like a Red Roof Inn, this dumpy hotel. And then finally, I think he decided that he was done, traumatizing my mother and brought us home. And he came home and he had a broken out window. And my poor mom, we talk about this all the time. I'm like, do you remember when I was kidnapped? Going back to Caity. Caity was able to just consider her ex her child's other parent and co-parent with that person. And he was able to do the same because neither of them are narcissists. Neither of them put themselves before their child. And they loved their child more than they hated each other, because I don't think they ever hated each other. And I think that is I don't think either of my parents were actually ever able to get over that hatred of each other. I mean, even when my dad died, he has 4 kids. I was the only one to show up to his funeral. And my mom was pissed at me for going. Why would you do that? Why would you go? And I was like, Mom, I let go of the resentment a long time ago. I'm not going to a funeral of someone I hate. I don't have feelings like that. He died 2 years ago. He came to me the summer before he died, came over to my house. It was the first time he had seen my house, first time he had met his granddaughter, first time I had seen him in about 10 years. And he said, I'm dying. He said, I don't have anybody. I don't have anybody to take me to doctor's appointments. I don't have anybody to help me if something goes wrong. And I said, you know what? Let's do it. Let's just drop everything that happened in the history, start over. I'll take you to your doctor's appointments and let's have a relationship. And he wasn't interested. I think he was expecting me to go, well, that's the bed that you made, lay in it. Like, I think that he was expecting me to have resentment and have this, like meanness and cruelness to me. And I didn't. I approached it with love. And I don't think he was expecting it because that's not how he would have approached it. He already had a plan. He wasn't going to be staying in Indiana. He was going to be going to Ohio and getting treatment there and living with his girlfriend. He was expecting me to go, absolutely not. I'm not helping you out. So then he could go to Ohio and go, oh, poor me. Nobody wants to help me. And that's just not what happened. So you could tell he was like, oh, shit. I'm sure he lied and told everybody that I never said anything like that. I was kind of expecting a shift in our relationship. I thought, okay, well, I didn't have a dad growing up, but maybe, he's terminally ill. Maybe this will be the time. And then he was on his deathbed and my sister and I went up to Ohio and he said, I don't have a relationship with you guys. You guys are getting nothing. But we've never had a relationship. I'm not starting now. Just totally berating us. I was like, we don't have to do this. We don't have to talk about money or inheritance. I don't care. I've never asked you for a dime. I'm not expecting it now, but I was expecting to come talk to you on your deathbed and you say, let's talk about all of the fun times we had together. Let's do this. Let's do that. Because I had fun times with him. And I think that's what's hard. When he died, I didn't have resentment towards him. I didn't hate him. I'll never have that opportunity to possibly make amends. It's just done. He didn't want to make amends with me when he was dying, and he never did throughout his life. So that kind of died with him, that thought of, well, maybe one day. It was just gone. But then I was grieving, he is 50% of me. That's my dad. No matter what the relationship was, I had to go no contact with him because I couldn't have him in my life and my life be stress-free. That's just not, those two things couldn't coexist. So I was grieving my dad and then also having to hear people go, well, you didn't have a relationship with him. Why do you feel the way you feel? And I'm like, I don't know how I feel. When you lose a parent and that parent is present in your life and a loving parent, you grieve in an uncomplicated way. But when you lose someone who abused you and was kind of just a horrible person throughout your life, and then even in death, you don't know what you're grieving. Why am I sad? Why am I crying? When I got the call that he had died, it literally stopped me in my tracks. And I didn't call my mom. I didn't call my sister. I called my best friend, Lucy, who had just lost her dad months before, who was an amazing dad. And she lost him in a very traumatic way. And I called her and I said, Lucy, I just don't know how to feel because he never loved me. And Lucy was like, it doesn't matter, Kaylee, that was your dad. And it's okay to feel however you feel. Just grieve how you need to grieve. This is someone who had just lost a fantastic father. She could have been thinking, well, it was harder for me because I had a relationship with my dad. Why are you upset? You lost nothing, essentially. And that's just not how she acted. She was the best thing in my life at that time. And then I had to go home and my mom's like, why are you upset? Why are you this? And I'm like, I'm not upset. I just don't know how to feel. I'm very much in a limbo right now. I'm not happy. Do you want me to celebrate? The other thing too, I think when people are dying or have died, you don't normally think about all of the horrible times you had with that person. When I started to really dig down into the trauma of everything, and really I channeled that into my book, and the characters going through the death of her dad who abandoned her distant father in a sense. And as I was writing from her perspective, I started realizing actually how I felt and what I was actually grieving and what I was actually feeling. And what it was I realized that there was absolutely nothing that I could do. His love was conditional. And I think that is the hardest thing to come to terms with. Your parent, arguably, whose love is supposed to be the most unconditional, was conditional. And there were no conditions that I was going to meet. There were no requirements that I was going to meet. There was no criteria, nothing that was going to happen that made him love me, because he was always going to move that goalpost. He had a problem when I was in my early 20s because I wasn't successful. Who fucking is? Then I became successful and he moved that goalpost. Well, now, I get married and I have a happy, healthy marriage. Oh, moves the goalpost. Now I don't like that you are a Mrs. That's all you'll be. Well, no. And then, oh, well, you'll never have children. Had a child, move the goalpost again. Well, now you're a stay-at-home mom and you're not successful anymore. So that's kind of a bummer. Like, there was just never going to be that perfect environment for him that I was going to be lovable in his eyes, because he was unable to love. And instead of understanding and looking within and going, you know what? I just think I'm not capable of loving people. He would just blame it on everybody else. No one was good enough. That's what I came to terms with talking to him. I said, your love was always conditional. That sucks. That sucks to realize, because I have a child and my love is so fucking unconditional. Like, there is not a single thing that child can do that will ever make me not love her. Going back, it wasn't the divorce that hurt. It was that. It was the realization that my dad couldn't love my mom and they got divorced. Well, I'm his kid. Maybe he'll love me. Dad couldn't love me either. So that's what I was really grieving, was the fact that it had dawned on me, oh, you are going to die not loving your children. It's hard to explain to people who have loving parents. Like, my husband has two very loving parents, so he didn't understand why I wanted to go to my dad's funeral. And I said, his last fuck you to me was, I don't love you. And my last fuck you to him was, well, I do love you.
If you like what you're hearing so far, give us a follow. We are a brand new podcast and we do everything ourselves, so your support quite literally keeps us going. And don't forget to tune in next Tuesday, right here on Sorry I'm a Bitch.